Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Ian Pad. I'm the Peacemonger. Just sorting out my camera here. Sorry, I'm slightly late coming to you today. I've been busy working on these Mandelson files. I was up at 4 o'clock in the morning. I don't know why. I think I'm on a diet and trying to lose weight. But anyway, I was up really early, sort of going through them forensically, and it's been occupying much of my time today. Such I've got some sort of weird tie combination going on here. Don't know what's happened there. But anyway, yesterday the so-called Mandelson files were released by the government right after Prime Minister's question time, using that old adage that yesterday was a good day to bury bad news. Obviously, the war in Iran is raging. We're no closer to ending the war in Ukraine. The whole world is going completely kind of belly up with conflict and disaster right now. Starmer did his normal boring, dull performance at Prime Minister's questions yesterday against a rather insipid, has to be said, Kemi Badenoch. God help us for our dreadful politicians right now. But right after these Mandelson papers were released, and what the Mandelson papers are the first volume in a batch of papers which help to explain how Lord Peter Mandelson, hopefully won't be Lord for much longer, was appointed the role of His Majesty's ambassador to Washington, D.C. And obviously the criticism that he's come under because of his links is well known, including at the time of his appointment, links with Jeffrey, Epstein. And so the government has felt under pressure to kind of be transparent. Frankly, hasn't been that transparent in what it's released, about the process. And the first volume has come out. Let's see what the next volume will look like. The Metropolitan Police have requested to hold back some documents in respect of their ongoing investigation into a possible criminal charge against Mandelson of misconduct in public office. So there are some specific due diligence questions that apparently Morgan McSweeney, 3 questions, just 3, that apparently Morgan McSweeney put to Mandelson, it seems, between the 11th of December 2024 and the 18th of December 2024, when the Foreign Office formally requested of the King approval for Mandelson's appointment. So a very, very short window of time. I'll get into the detail of that, quite soon. What has been striking to me has been the sort of bland way that the mainstream media has reported the Mandelson papers. And on the surface, I can kind of understand it, because if you read them, all 147 pages, it's pretty boring stuff. Most of it is pretty boring stuff. There's lots of standard contracts. There's lots of standard forms of, this is just padding. There's lots and lots of padding. There are also lots of pages with absolutely nothing on them. There's not a lot of meat in there, but what there is, I think, is incredibly damning. And of course, mainstream journalists are coming at this from the perspective of never having worked at the Foreign Office, not really knowing how the kind of procedure works, and probably not wanting to annoy 10 Downing Street too much for fear of losing privileged access for the kind of juicy sound bites from, Keir Starmer's cavalier and dashingly unspectacular government. So, I mean, the Daily Mail was slightly, a bit more out there, but generally speaking, it's been a total bore fest, referring to this largely as a non-event, waiting for volume 2 of the documents to come out. We don't know when that will be. Let's see how soon the Metropolitan Police complete their investigation. But for me, having gone through it with a fine-tooth comb, for your benefit, so you don't have to bore yourself stiff by reading this material as well, I think there are 4 quite damning things, one of which has kind of been picked up by MPs, most of which have not, been picked up by the press or by MPs to any significant extent, with the tiny caveat around, the Daily Mail for the first one, which I will come on to. And the in the preamble to the documents, there's a notice on redaction policy. You know, the bits that they're not going to include in the document, the bits that they're going to strike out. And one of the fascinating things for me was to follow the convention of not including the names of junior officials. That is actually a standard convention. You know, we don't. When I wrote my book, A Misfit in Moscow, um, that book there. You know, I wasn't allowed to use the actual names of junior members of staff. I mean, that's just a standard civil service convention. You are allowed to refer to very senior, you know, members of staff, and some are referred to in the document. But there's one notable appointment, and the context to Mandelson's appointment was actually that the person who was given the job, Tim Barrow, Sir Tim Barrow, now Lord Barrow of Infernus, I don't know what he's Lord of, possibly Coventry. I know he's a Coventry football fan. He was going to be appointed to the job, former National Security Advisor, former Ambassador to Moscow, my boss, you know, at the time, a very esteemed diplomat, as I referred to in a previous video that I'd encourage you to look up. And Keir Starmer blocked his appointment in June, and this was reported in the BBC, you know, at the time. And speculation kind of ran that David Miliband or Peter Mandelson were being considered for the job. But the backdrop to Mandelson's appointment is that Starmer hangs around for 4 months after he's elected to think about it. He doesn't make a decision. I don't know why he doesn't make a decision, but he doesn't make a decision. Whereupon the process becomes very, very rushed. You know, Trump gets elected. He's going to be coming into office in January. Karen Pierce, the existing ambassador, is going to be leaving in January. They need an ambassador, but they blocked Tim Barrow, so they need to find somebody. So that's why the kind of process is incredibly rushed. And the 11th of November is the first recommendation from the former chief secretary to the cabinet secretary, Simon Case, to the prime minister about what, boss, I mean, to use less formal language, you know, we need to find an ambassador. And Tim Barrow's name has been redacted. So you're reading this document and it's talking about redacted, was recruited to the job through fair and open competition, but redacted, you know, was seen as above the line and suitable for the job, and this, you know, and all this. And Tim Barrow's name is just completely airbrushed out of it, which was bizarre. I mean, that's not one of the 4 points I'm getting to, but it's bizarre that kind of the Starmer government is trying to kind of blank out the fact that they actually blocked Tim Barrow from being ambassador, and I believe he would have been a very good ambassador, you know, to Washington DC. And they've redacted his name. Now, Tim was at the time one of the most senior diplomats in the Foreign Office. In fact, if not the most senior. So he was absolutely above the threshold for not being a junior member of staff whose name had to be redacted. But they redacted his name anyway. I mean, that's just quite bizarre. So I think basically, I mean, Starmer just, you know, wants to deflect attention from the fact that actually it was his choice not to have an eminent and experienced diplomat as Britain's ambassador to Washington, and save him all of this problem that he's run into by the appointment of Lord Mandelson, who was good friends with the late paedophile, Jeffrey Epstein. So 11th of November, Simon Case, need to find somebody. We can either recruit somebody, but there's not really enough time to recruit anybody, or we can have a political appointee. And, you know, you said in the past you want a political appointee, and so on. And so Keir Starmer's obviously, okay, let's get a political appointee. I mean, people have been talking for months about it either being Peter Mandelson or David Miliband, the former foreign secretary. But anyway, let's pretend, you know, to look for a political appointee. So, you know, they've got to find this political appointee. They've got to do so-called due diligence on this political appointee, which apparently happens on the 4th of December. You know, Trump comes into power, you know, just 6 weeks later after this, by the way. And on the 11th of December, you know, the actual recommendation, you know, goes in to Keir Starmer. Now, at this point, I'll pause and say I just can't emphasize enough that His Majesty's Ambassador to Washington, HMA, that's what you call ambassadors, HMA Washington, is by far the most senior diplomatic role in the United Kingdom. It's prized even more than the permanent undersecretary role, the guy who's the head of the diplomatic service. Currently, Ollie Robbins, who's never actually been a diplomat. So I don't know how he got the job. But anyway, parking that issue for now. You know, Ambassador to Washington, it's the most senior diplomatic job in the UK. But therefore, because of that, you know, the bar on the qualities and the skills and the behaviors and the standards and the values that you need to represent as ambassador to Washington is, I mean, it's stratospheric. I mean, even as me, as a bog standard senior diplomat, you know, the expectations on my behavior were very, very high. If you're ambassador to Washington, you've got nowhere to hide. You know, when you're a diplomat, you're constantly in the spotlight as a representative, you know, of your country. And HMA Washington is the most high profile job of all. So here we are, 11th of December. Who should we have? You can't have any skeletons under your closet. Who should we choose? Who should we choose? Who should we choose? How about Peter Mandelson? Just like, oh my God. Talk about not having skeletons under the closet. And apparently, you know, there's been a 7-day process of due diligence. Let me point out and be clear here that due diligence, this is not security vetting. This is just Starmer and his crowd, you know, chumming up together and saying, well, he's okay, isn't he? Surely he's not so bad. I mean, this is not a process. Due diligence that took place was not a process. You know, it wasn't a process by any standards. And you'll find out why very shortly. So the due diligence process gets handled in the most cavalier and slapdash way that you could possibly imagine. I mean, it's not even a process; it's a joke. It's an absolute joke. And here is where we run into the first big problem with the Mandelson files. There are 4. Here's the first one: Matt Doyle's role in approving Mandelson. You know, when this note was sent to Keir Starmer on the 11th of December. You know, due diligence has already happened apparently on the 4th, you know, of December, 1 week before, and Morgan McSweeney, you know, has spoken to Mandelson, and he said, well, the director of communications is happy with the questions read to Peter Mandelson about contact. So Morgan McSweeney's spoken to him. He's checked the director of communications. He thinks, yeah, that all looks fine. But unfortunately, the director of communications is Matt Doyle. And if that name sounds familiar, Matt Doyle was made a life peer by Starmer on the 6th of January this year, just 2 months ago. He's now Lord Doyle, even though lots of members of the Labour Party are looking to have him stripped of his life peerage. Think about that for a moment. On the 7th of February, he was outed by the Sunday Times because of his support for a paedophile counsellor in Scotland, Scott Morton. Scott Morton was charged in 2016 with possessing indecent images of girls as young as 10 years of age. Okay, he was later charged with encouraging a girl he believed to be 12 years of age into electronic communications, but he was spared jail. He was discovered again in 2021 and 2024 with indecent images on his phone and jailed for, I believe, if the information I was researching today is correct, for 16 months in 2025. So if you rewind to 2016, Matt Doyle, like Scott Morton, and even after Scott Morton has been charged with having indecent images of children as young as 10 years of age, girls as young as 10 years of age, Matt Doyle, the Prime Minister's Director of Communications, not then, but he was, you know, in December 2024, you know, Matt Doyle campaigns for Scott Morton in a 2017 council election, you know, when Morton stood as an independent council candidate in Moray. Matt Doyle campaigned wearing a shirt that said, "Re-elect Scott Morton," after Scott Morton had been charged with possession of indecent images of girls as young as 10 years of age. Now, everyone makes mistakes. I mean, frankly, that's a fairly unforgivable mistake, you know, to make. You know, Matt Doyle made his mistakes in the past. However, the Mandelson files reveals, hidden away at page 94 of 147 pages, that Matt Doyle is a friend of Peter Mandelson. Go figure. The day after Peter Mandelson was basically sacked by Keir Starmer on the 11th of September 2025, when all the information about Epstein was coming to light, Matt Doyle was interviewed by the Prime Minister's General Counsel the following day on the 12th of September. And Matt Doyle is the guy who's been closely involved in the due diligence, around, the Mandelson appointment, the due diligence process, which wasn't a process, is a complete sham and a joke, just to kind of, shove Mandelson into the job. Matt Doyle, when he meets, the General Counsel on the 12th of September, he didn't recall specific instances of meeting Mandelson in December 2024. He never even met Mandelson, in the month that he was appointed. When Mandelson's appointment was signed off by Keir Starmer, hold on a minute, go back to this note of the 11th of December 2024. The Director of Communications is satisfied with Mandelson's responses to questions about his contacts with Jeffrey Epstein, but Mandelson's had no contact with. Matt Doyle has had no contact with Mandelson in December. By his account, he hasn't discussed the appointment to be British ambassador. He hasn't met Mandelson formally for unilateral, as he says, meetings. I don't know what a unilateral meeting is. Oh, I suppose meeting with yourself, is it? Surely it'd be a bilateral meeting. But anyway, don't get me stuck on that. He doesn't recall seeing Peter Mandelson at lovey parties in London. Yet when Morgan McSweeney asked Matt Doyle about the presentational risks, Matt Doyle, as Director of Communications in Downing Street, just says, yeah, I can't see a problem with that. In other words, Doyle, who is a long-time supporter of Starmer, and we now know a supporter of a paedophile in Scotland, is nodding through his friend, Peter Mandelson's appointment, knowing that Mandelson is also a known friend of a paedophile, because he's not concerned about the reputational risks for an appointment to the most senior diplomatic job in the UK, British ambassador, to Washington. I mean, this is not due diligence. This is a Labour insider and a paedophile supporter, Doyle, looking out for his paedophile supporting mate, Peter Mandelson. The risks of Mandelson's behaviour are described in very bland terms as general reputational risks. Like, well, it might be slightly harmful to the British government if anybody finds out about this. General reputational risks, not significant reputational risks, not severe reputational risks, general reputational risks, and they're quickly dismissed. However, those risks include the fact that Mandelson stayed in Epstein's house in 2009 while Epstein was in jail, at a time when Mandelson was the UK business secretary. Yes, a UK cabinet minister staying in the home of a convicted paedophile who was in jail. I mean, it just beggars belief. I mean, in terms of due diligence, is that a good look for a British ambassador to the US? Not least given the intense scrutiny already building in the US around the Epstein case. No. Mandelson is and was known as an inveterate liar who was forced to resign twice, from cabinet positions in 1998 after not declaring a £373,000 loan to buy a house from his mate in the cabinet, and in 2001 for passports for cash inquiry, although, in fairness, he was later cleared of wrongdoing in an independent inquiry by Matt Doyle. No, scrub that out. Mandelson is the eternal political phoenix. He's forever emerging from the ashes of his catastrophic choices, clearly driven by love of powerful people and money. He was made business secretary in 2008, and the following year he's staying in the house of a convicted paedophile, Jeffrey Epstein, and he doesn't see this as a problem. And his paedophile supporting friend Matt Doyle thinks that's okay. Re-elect Scott Morton. Send Mandy to Washington. I mean, this is outrageous. Starmer has come under enormous pressure over Doyle's appointment as a peer. Yet it is remarkable that the UK mainstream media hasn't sparked on the fact that Doyle nodded through Mandelson, his mate, his paedophile supporting mate Mandelson's appointment to Washington, knowing of his association with Epstein, yet not seeing it as a problem in the most important diplomatic role, for the United Kingdom. That is problem number one. Problem number two, which we shouldn't have even got to this problem because Mandelson shouldn't have been given the job in the first place. This is a big problem. His Majesty the King was not made aware of the concerns around Lord Mandelson. when making the appointment. On the 18th of December, Starmer's foreign policy private secretary tells Philip Barton, the permanent secretary of the FCDO at the time, to proceed with Mandelson's appointment at pace. Now, this is just 1 week. 1 week after the 11th of December note to the Prime Minister, obviously Morgan McSweeney has asked these other 3 questions, which the Metropolitan Police won't tell us what they are at the moment, to provide even more due diligence, about the unimpeachability of Peter Mandelson, the paedophile supporter and liars, standards to serve in public office. 1 week later, the private secretary who I actually worked with, quite a good person, but bad judgment, encouraging Philip Barton to proceed at pace with Mandelson's appointment. This is, almost at Christmas here, guys, almost at Christmas, and so hurry up. So this is the 18th of December. That same day, Sir Philip Barton writes to Sir Clive Alderton, the private secretary to His Majesty the King, seeking the monarch's approval of Mandelson's appointment. Now, that might seem strange, but that is actually standard practice. Ambassadors are representatives of the Crown. Actually, they're not representatives of the government. That's why they're called His Majesty's ambassador. They actually serve the monarch. And I think that's an important point to understand, that, ambassadors are sent by heads of state, in our case by the king, in the case of the US by the president. When ambassadors arrive, they hand over their credentials. It's literally a letter from the king saying, this is a good dude. Peter Mandelson, clean as a whistle, mate. He'll be fine as your ambassador, our ambassador to Washington. That's how it works. The king has to be satisfied that the person we're sending as ambassador is a good and suitable person for the job, right? So the king has to approve it. And for the many junior ambassador roles, maybe that's called a junior kind of pro forma sort of process. But this is a big deal. Ambassador to Washington, big deal. But no, do it at pace. So 18th of December, Philip Barton writes to Sir Clive Alderton at Buckingham Palace, saying basically, we need to approve. The government wants to make a political appointment. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen sometimes. It has happened in the past. This wasn't an exceptional case. Political appointments by the Tories and by the Labour governments have been made before. So in that regard, it wasn't exceptional. Yet in informing Buckingham Palace, Philip Barton sends a copy of Mandelson's CV, and that says nothing about Mandelson's past contact and his association with Epstein, the paedophile. Nothing. It literally is a bland CV that just lists all of the jobs that Mandelson's had. Doesn't mention that he had to resign in 1998. Doesn't mention that he had to resign in 2001. Doesn't mention that he stayed at Epstein's house in 2009 while Epstein was in prison on charges of paedophilia and so on. Doesn't mention the reputational risks around Epstein's appointment, from this so-called due diligence process. It just gives this bland and empty CV and says, go on, King, this is our guy, give Mandy the job. And, bear in mind that the King's brother, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, the Andrew formerly known as Prince, was already coming under huge pressure about his relationship with Epstein, having settled a claim with Virginia Giuffre, the late Virginia Giuffre, in 2022. Even now, the king is coming under intense pressure, about his brother's relationship with Epstein. His brother, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, who, like Mandelson, has also been, arrested and is being investigated for allegations of misconduct in public office. So, he would have been aware of the sensitivities around the Epstein case because of the direct impact that was having on him. And the monarchy in general, in the United Kingdom, that this association with a known paedophile, that his brother's known association with a known paedophile and people trafficker, sex trafficker of young women and girls, was a massive issue, constitutional issue. And so surely we should have made His Majesty the King aware that actually, the person that we wanted to send as Britain's ambassador to Washington actually was also a good friend of Jeffrey Epstein, and as it now turns out, has also been not charged, but is being investigated for allegations of misconduct in public office because of his association with Jeffrey Epstein. Yet the Foreign Office does not flag with Buckingham Palace the slightly inconvenient fact that, you know, Mandelson is actually kind of hangs out with the same people as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. And this is absolutely wrong. That the palace should have been made aware of Mandelson's Epstein relationship to allow His Majesty to take a more considered view of whether, given what he already knew because of his brother Andrew Mountbatten Windsor and the kind of pressure that was creating and the constitutional implications that had and what that meant for the reputation of the United Kingdom, surely we should have informed the king that actually Mandelson, associated with the same guy and could be subject to the same sort of pressure and the same sort of allegations, which have actually now come to pass. We just didn't tell the king. And, it shouldn't have even got that far. Mandelson's appointment should not have been confirmed by Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer's office should not have pressured Philip Barton, who in the papers it says has reservations. Well, he didn't express his reservations. He just went ahead and bounced Buckingham Palace into agreeing the appointment. The king has signed off the appointment of Peter Mandelson in less than 2 days. 2 days. Because on the 20th of December, 2024, the government makes an official announcement that Mandelson is going to Washington. And they wouldn't do that unless they'd received the go-ahead from Buckingham Palace. That's just how it works. Even in the kind of head of mission appointment letter, the letter you get saying that you can be ambassador somewhere, it says, don't tell anybody until the king has approved your appointment. In case the king, I don't remember any circumstances where the monarch said no. They may exist. I don't know, but I don't remember it happening. But it could happen. So you're explicitly told not to tell anybody you'd be made ambassador somewhere until the king has approved the job. And the king has done it in 2 days flat, having been given just a bog standard CV that mentions none of the risks around Peter Mandelson, that mentions none of the Jeffrey Epstein connections, given what's happening, with the king's brother. That was a shocking failure, not to point that out to the king and to expose the king to further risk, frankly. So there wasn't a due diligence process. That is a complete joke. They just, it was Mandelson's paedophile supporting friend, Matt Doyle, just nodding through the appointment, saying, yeah, as the comms director, the guy who should be looking out for any communications and presentational risks for the government, knowing of Mandelson's Epstein relationship, given his own personal relationship with a paedophile in Scotland, it just, waving it through. Yeah, that's fine. Send Mandy off to Washington. And more than that, by late January, we then learned that Ollie Robbins, this is from the papers, I think this was maybe at 5:30 in the morning. I thought they got to this bit. By late January, we learned that Ollie Robbins, the new FCDO permanent secretary, who's actually not a diplomat, he's just a political appointee. He's just one of these totally empty careerists who people wonder how he got the job. But lots of people tell me that the relationship, the whole atmosphere in the FCDO has been really toxic since he arrived. But anyway, I'm not there now, so I'm glad to be shot of it. But anyway, in late January 2025, we learned that Ollie Robbins is pushing for Mandelson to have his customary audience with the king. So not only have we bounced the king into agreeing this appointment, we're also now trying to, I assume, because Mandelson is asking for it, because that is exactly the sort of narcissistic person Mandelson will be, they're asking for the audience of the monarch. Actually, tiny protocol point: audiences of the monarch are called of the monarch, not with the monarch, because they have an audience with you. You're not having an audience with them because they're the monarch. Anyway, small diplomatic detour there. So Ollie Robbins is pushing for Mandelson to have his audience of the king, which is standard. If you're an ambassador, you have your audience of the monarch. Because the monarch then presents you with your letters of credentials. It doesn't have to happen that way. You can just get it in the post. Buckingham Palace, and you could, from the centre of St James Park, you look in one direction, you see the Foreign Office. You look in the other direction, you see Buckingham Palace. So, I mean, you just walk the paper across. You don't have to have the meeting, but it is, is standard practice for, and lots of people like it because you get to meet the king, or back in my day, the Queen. Um, so, so the Foreign Office is pushing for Mandelson to meet the king, and the papers don't make clear whether this meeting took place. I don't know whether it did. It doesn't make clear. It's kept that point out of the record. But if it did, I'd love to see that photo. But I'm sure the king would absolutely not love to see that photo. And I know the Foreign Office, who govern when it comes to international affairs, the government's relationship with Buckingham Palace, won't want that photo to see the light of day if it's in fact been taken. So let's see whether that audience of the king took place. So that's the second point. We didn't tell the king that Mandelson was a good friend of paedophile Jeffrey Epstein, just like the king's brother was a good friend of paedophile Jeffrey Epstein, and that is a massive failure, an absolutely massive failure that we've not done that, and a disgrace, frankly, that the Foreign Office and Philip Barton has been so weak that he just sent this CV, off that lists none of the risks attached to the job. It's just an email. It's Clive Alderson. Oh, we need to make this appointment. Here's the CV. Two days later, Clive's kind of maybe waved it, past His Majesty. He said, "Yeah, yes, what a jolly good chap he is." And Mandelson's got the job, just like that. Bob's your uncle. Yeah. So we then come on to the third issue. I mean, all the issues are as bad as each other, but I mean, the first two are bad enough. No due diligence. Not telling the king that Mandelson was friends with a paedophile because his paedophile mate in number 10 actually nodded his appointment through. Massive problem. Third problem, security clearance. We're now almost at Christmas. Mandelson deploys right at the start of February. We don't have a lot of time here, guys. Mandelson gets a nice email from HR telling him about practicalities and sending across his new SCDO laptop. It tells him they'll also need security clearance. And actually, remarkably, literally remarkably, he gets confirmation of his DV clearance 1 month later on the 30th of January. Now, I'm sorry, but there's no way in hell in which Mandelson is going to get a full DV security clearance done in a month. Not least as a Christmas and New Year holidays intervene. Firstly, he's got to fill out an absolutely enormous form with all sorts of personal details included in it, covering every aspect of his life, his relationships, his finances, which weird secessionist and seditious groups he goes to, whether he smokes dope, but all these things. He's got to be truthful, which, as Mandelson is the ultimate liar, would be really difficult for him. I can't believe that if he did fill out this form, he would have written much that was truthful in it, but that's just my personal prejudice, and I apologize for that. Send copy of his bank statements. He's got to provide people who are prepared to offer a character reference for him. Honestly, it takes ages. Like all of his family members, right down to his grandparents, his spouse, and their parents and grandparents. All of their details, when they were born, where they were born. It takes ages to fill out, and believe me, I've done it many times. Because DV normally lasts for 7 years. You need to renew it. It takes ages, and Christmas is happening. He'll have lots of parties. Matt Doyle will be coming over for dinner. They may be phoning Scott Morton. Who knows? What's going to happen over the turkey. So he's got to do all that. The vetting people are going to go through all of that, vast amounts of information with a fine-tooth comb. They've got to contact these referees. Sometimes they talk to them in person or on the phone. When I did it, when I first joined, I literally had my school teacher was on there. I added my school teacher, and they phoned them up. What's his proud like then? Is he a complete prat like everybody has said? I don't know what he asked my school teacher, but yeah, it was that intrusive. And somebody that I work with the police. So, then they've got to interview Mandelson, Anybody who goes through TV has to have the interview. Uh, I don't recall a single time in which that interview for me took less than 2 hours. You know, I mean, it's a big thing, um, and they literally go through every line in this massive form that it's all electronic now, but you know what I mean. When I first did it as a form, but now it's electronic. But you know, whatever, same thing. I mean, they go through every single line in that, uh, and they ask you about every single line in that. You know, everything, and maybe they're standard tick box yes no kind of questions, whatever. You know, are you committed to the overthrow of the monarchy? Do you have plans to kind of blow up Parliament? So, you know, you're the modern day Guy Fawkes, I mean, whatever. You know, when did you last stop beating your husband? I don't know. Everything. You know, when did you last stay at a convicted paedophile's house? I'm sure that's not a question that got asked if the interview even took place. So this interview happens, and then they got to go away and collate all the information that they've gathered. You know, you filled out this vast amount of information. They've been in touch with your friends or your referees. They've interviewed you for 2 hours. That they've done all sorts of other background research on you. They've then got to collate that. They've got to write this report. I've never seen one because obviously I was on the other side of the fence. I was the person being vetted, not the person doing the vetting. But they've got to, I imagine, do a detailed report and recommendation to the head of personal security team. They've got to give approval, you know, for security clearance to be provided. I've never known this happen in a few short weeks. I mean, obviously Mandelson was going to be HMA Washington, so it had been rushed through at pace. But still, I can't believe that would have been done in a thorough way in the space of, you know, just a few short weeks. All that, Mandelson would have been truthful in his answers, you know, to the questions posed to him. And, you know, the Mandelson papers don't include any of this information. We don't get to see behind the veil of the vetting process. It's like it didn't exist. You know, we've had due diligence, which actually was a sham and not due diligence at all. You know, I mean, that wasn't security vetting. Security vetting is a whole different ball game, believe you me. So I'm not sure that it's happened. And if it has happened, it's happened in a really kind of cursory way because you know, ministers think that these rules don't apply to them. I've seen it so many times. I was working on a complex case. I can't discuss the details of what it was with Dominic Raab when he was Foreign Secretary, and you know, we had to have these meetings with access to very classified information, let's say, and one of his special advisors wanted to see this information, and we had to point out that she didn't have DV, so she couldn't because she didn't have DV, and Rob just didn't get this. He thought, well, she's a Spanish. She works for me. I'm elected. Therefore, she doesn't need to have these processes like plebs like you. And that's what it's like. And I'm quite sure that Mandelson would think that these security procedures don't apply to him. I'm also quite sure that in any questioning, he would have lied if that questioning took place. And that if a truncated, condensed, slimmed down, at pace, you know, security vetting process took place, you know, then it wouldn't have been as rigorous as a normal security vetting process. It absolutely wouldn't have picked up on the Epstein issue, because if it had, you know, I'm quite sure that Mandelson would not have received his security clearance. I'm quite sure that had he said, well, yeah, you know, when I was business secretary, I did actually, yeah, I did stay at Jeffrey Epstein's house while he was in prison, you know, and yeah, there's a picture of me with, you know, young women that Epstein had trafficked. That's a bit embarrassing. But apart from that, you know, I mean, I'm as clean as a whistle. So I don't believe that that process has happened properly, and if it has happened or an attempt has been made in the minuscule amount of time available for it to happen, that he has lied in that process. Because had the facts been known of his relationship with Epstein, he would not have got security clearance. Now, you get in towards the the start of January, when the cogs of the security vetting process have only just started slowly to turn. Somebody in the Foreign Office in the Americas Directorate is talking about briefing Mandelson in person, including at higher tiers. So even before he's got security clearance, which doesn't happen, we're not told it's happened until the 30th of January. Even before he's received security clearance, somebody in the Foreign Office in December has written to him saying, "Well, we can brief you from 6th of January onwards, including at higher tiers," and that means that before he's even got security clearance, Mandelson is going to be given access to high classification communications and one assumes information, which is remarkable that somebody who's gone through a dodgy recruitment process, King's been bounced, he hasn't been security cleared, we know about his Epstein links, we're giving him access to high classification comms, to have meetings with officials whose names are redacted because they're too junior, one assumes, in the Americas Directorate. I mean, it's remarkable. Mandelson is essentially being briefed on information that he should not have access to without DV clearance. And the problem is bigger than that, because when he finds out he does have security clearance on the 30th of January, shortly before he travels out to Washington, he finds out that he also has to apply for struck clearance. And struck clearance is, as it makes clear in the Mandelson file. So I'm not saying anything out of, that I shouldn't be saying, but I mean, struck clearance is specific to the job. This gives you access to the specific intelligence material that you'll need to read for the job that you're doing. So in his case for Washington, but as it's Washington, I mean, they're looking at intelligence from all over the world, because they're talking to the Americans all the time about every issue around the world. This is not just intelligence about the US, guys. This is about everything, and so Mandelson is in a position, he's applied for struck clearance. We don't get confirmation in the Mandelson files that if he's received struck clearance, but if he has, then he can potentially have access to intelligence material covering every country in the world, Russia, China, everything. And he's talked lovingly about meeting Xi Jinping, and we know that. And he was on a board of a company in Russia, Sistema, for example. I mean, I'm not dissing China or Russia, by the way. I happen to like both countries. But I mean, we're given a guy who shouldn't have been given the job, who the king has signed off on without full knowledge, who hasn't been given proper security clearance, potentially access to intelligence covering all of the main adversarial countries around the world. I mean, it's just mind-bogglingly bad, So yeah, in his standard, standard letter of appointment on the 4th of February from the Foreign Office to Mandelson, clearly no one has read it. It's just literally a standard text. I mean, that's why the Mandelson files are so boring, because it's obviously intended to kind of bamboozle you with all these kind of boring, long standard documents. In this standard letter of appointment, Mandelson is told that you should submit a new strap application form for your new position at least 3 months before you're due to start at post. Which is, quite remarkable. And if it takes 3 months to do strap, which is a much less complicated process than DV, I can't explain why, but it is, then, DV. No way he's had a proper DV. Absolutely no way. And even in a truncated DV, he will have lied. Of that, I'm absolutely sure. 4th point, the last point, the severance payment. Now, this is the one issue that is kind of floating around a bit more. Mandelson was given a payout of £75,000, having asked for £547,000. Upon being sacked, Mandelson asked to basically have all of the pay that he would have received had he served in the job for the whole 4 years. So he was getting about 156,000, a year. He'd been there a few months. He had some allowances on top of that. But he calculated that had he stayed in the job essentially until February 2029, he would have got £547,000 out of the FCDO in pay. And so that is what he's asked for. We've sacked him, but he says, well, just pay me for another 40 months. It's just like, this guy loves money so much that he thinks, well, yeah, just, okay, yes, I sort of friends with a paedophile, and I should have told you about stuff that I didn't tell you about at the time, but just pay me for 40 months because, you've decided to kind of summarily dismiss me. I mean, but he's asked for that, which is clearly ridiculous. He's denied this, by the way. I mean, this just shows the character of Peter Mandelson. He's denied that he asked for this money, but there are several points in the Mandelson files where you see that it's recorded that he has asked for this money. We give him £75,000, as a payoff to get rid of him, but basically. And here's several members of Parliament have basically said that he should give the money back. And I'm saying now, Mandelson should give back the £75,000. He should absolutely give back that money because he didn't deserve it. The complete lying toad. He should never have been given the job. He should give back. Peter Mandelson give back the £75,000. But we made this payout to him. But we made this payout by saying, I think the Foreign Office has lied to the Treasury about this. Quite clearly. In his contract, Mandelson, it's made clear that the Crown is not required to offer notice when they get rid of somebody. So, in certain situations, you can sack somebody without notice. I mean, in Moscow, I know of at least one case of somebody who was sent home the next day, without going into the details. I think that person stayed on for a bit longer, but you can literally sack somebody and not give them any notice in certain circumstances. And these circumstances appear to have met that threshold. But that's actually not the key point. I mean, Mandelson is sacked on the 11th of September. Keir Starmer has a meeting, the Foreign Secretary's there, several number 10 staff are there, and so on. Matt Doyle's not there, but maybe Matt Doyle joins anyway. Who knows? Maybe Scott Morton's there. I don't know. Maybe he dialed in from jail. Who knows? But they have this meeting on the 11th of September. Ollie Robbins is there from the Foreign Office, and during the meeting, Ollie Robbins phones up Peter Mandelson and tells him that he's been sacked. Basically, that's what happens. I can't believe you lied to us, Peter. Really? Mandelson still stays in the magnificent Lutyens residence for another 7 days until the 18th of September, whereupon he's told to get out. He's told to go. He stays there because his dog needs to go to the vet. One of the more bizarre micro details, of the Mandelson files. And he then skulks back to London, on the 24th of September. So he hangs around in the US for a bit. And actually, the key point is that his employment is terminated as of the 16th of October, when he signs a settlement agreement. So essentially, he's had 5 weeks' notice, really, which is contractually the minimum required for this sort of situation. Strictly speaking, the Foreign Office was within its rights to sack him with no notice. But in a more generous interpretation, you can say, the Foreign Office could conceivably have been obligated to give him 5 weeks' notice, and that's essentially what he's had. He's had 5 weeks' notice. So even after he's been sacked on the 11th of September, he's been paid. He's been paid as an employee for another 5 weeks, and that's the key point. Before he gets his £75,000, so he's been paid in terms of his notice, essentially, before his employment is terminated. But the problem is he's negotiating with some random acting head of people, head of HR in the Foreign Office, guy called Mark Power, who's apparently a Liz Truss favourite. Apparently, just saying, just a rumor. Don't judge me. I don't know him. And Mark Power is basically negotiating with Mandelson, who who says, "Well, give me £547,000, pay me until 2029." It's literally what Mandelson was asking for, apparently. And Mark Power says we should negotiate this, without getting into clause 12 and 13. So clause 12 and 13 of the contract are the clauses that say that we don't have to give any notice at all. So what Mark Power, reading between the lines, is saying is, well, we could just sack you. I mean, if you like, or we can come up with a more reasonable figure. I mean, that, and clearly Mandelson has backed down, and they've said, well, can we meet somewhere in the middle? Maybe not somewhere a bit closer to your position than Foreign Office. And the Foreign Office agrees to pay him £75,000 after he's already been paid 5 weeks' notice, essentially because his employment isn't terminated until the 16th of October, right? And the Foreign Office doesn't need to do this. It's well within its rights to sack him and pay him his 5 weeks' notice, which is already generous by certain interpretation of the contract, and say sod off and see you in the industrial tribunal if you want. I mean, that's what I would have done. I wouldn't have paid him £75,000. But the Foreign Office has gone soft on him. And if I read some of the kind of clauses of his contract, which are in the Mandelson files, if you wake up at 4 tonight and you're not sure what to do, can't bear to watch midnight TV, you've seen to read a boring government document, fill your boots. One of the clauses, it says early termination for fixed term appointments. Mandelson was on a fixed term appointment. He wasn't even appointed as a diplomat. Very microscopic detail. He's employed as a home civil servant to do a diplomatic job. I don't even know how that works. But anyway, early termination for fixed term appointments. He was on a fixed term appointment. Notwithstanding the fixed term nature of this contract, the FCDO reserves the right, at its sole discretion, to terminate your employment at any time, by giving you notice. And they essentially given him notice by letting him stay till the 16th of October. That's at clause 12. These are the clause 12 and 13 that Mark Powell wants to steer clear of, basically to kind of get Mandelson to back down, because Mandelson knows full well that the office can just sack him, without paying him any notice money. Clause 13 says, because of the power of the crown, oh my God. I long for the days when we had power. We're talking about 20th or 19th century stuff here now, I fear. Because of the power of the crown, feel the power. Because of the power of the crown to dismiss at will, you are not entitled to a period of notice terminating your employment. However, unless your employment is terminated by mutual agreement, which it was actually, we shall be entitled to dismiss you any time, without notice or payment in lieu of notice. So, they can dismiss you at any time without notice or payment in lieu of notice. This is why Mark Powell wanted to steer clear of clause 13, because he knew that, and Mandelson knew that we could just sack him. If we reasonably consider that you have committed any serious breach of your obligations as an employee or committed any act of gross misconduct, well, lying about his relationship with a paedophile, I mean, I don't know what you think, but I think that's gross misconduct. That's a sackable offence, and he has been sacked. So the clauses in his contract are perfectly clear. That we can sack him and he gets no money. He gets 5 weeks extra pay anyway, and he's getting paid £156 a year. So, I mean, by his luxury standards, that wouldn't be a lot. But for us in the diplomatic service, formerly in the diplomatic service, it's about the job and about, HMA Washington is the best job in the world, most senior job. It doesn't matter if the pay is maybe not at standards of industry. I mean, that's it's just a prestigious job. So he's been paid 5 weeks at that generous salary, £156,000 a year. So we don't owe him any more money, but we still pay him £75,000, which is absolutely shocking. So yeah, I mean that is a massive problem, to us, because it's a problem to us because Mark Power, the HR guy, essentially lies to the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, because he has to submit, to make any sort of payout to an employee who's leaving. You don't have to. Actually, they could have just paid They could have paid Mandelson without reporting to the Treasury, but they decided to kind of make it look all legit and above board. So they decided to kind of let the Chief Secretary to the Treasury know that they're going to do this with Mandelson, I guess because of his high-profile kind of position, because he was in the news all the time and all that sort of thing. Let's do the due diligence, guys, and get it all in place. So Mark Power writes on the 30th of September saying, that, we were contractually obliged to pay, Mandelson a severance payment, which we weren't. And the severance payment of £75,000 is calculated on the basis of the 3 months of salary. We're basically giving him 3 months' notice when he's already had 5 weeks of notice, which is allowed from the contract. So he's getting another 3 months of notice pay and a bit more to make it up to £75,000. That's basically how the figure works out. I think about £43,000 is his notice pay, and the rest, is a bit extra for your friends, Peter. So and this was totally wrong. I mean, Mark Power's written to the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, the second most important minister who has cabinet rank, in the Treasury, and said that we are contractually obliged. And all the mainstream media news reports now say that this was we were contractually obliged to make a severance payment to Mandelson. We weren't. We weren't. We paid him 5 weeks already, of notice before his employment was terminated on the 16th of October of 2025. We weren't at that point contractually obliged to pay him 3 months' notice and a bit more. There was no contractual obligation to make this payment to him. We just decided to do it by sidestepping the clauses in his employment contract, which dealt with the issue of his termination, which could have been done on a summary basis and without any pay of notice. So the Foreign Office has lied, to the Treasury about this matter, quite frankly, and it's a shocker, that they've done that. So that just adds insult to injury and actually adds further weight to, the kind of the MPs who are coming out now, to say that actually Mandelson should give back the money. Mandelson, give back the money. That's why I say I totally support them, in saying that. So I mean, this whole thing has been, it's been a complete disaster, from start to finish. We have this. We keep talking about due diligence as if it's security vetting. It's not security vetting. It's basically kind of Mandelson's friend, who's also friends, with a paedophile in Scotland, Matt Doyle. Just not even meeting Mandelson, not even talking to Mandelson, understanding Mandelson's links with Epstein, having a friendship with Scott Morton himself, who was a convicted paedophile, saying, well, actually, the fact that he knows Epstein shouldn't bar him from getting appointed to the job as ambassador to Washington. Scandalous. And nobody in the mainstream media is zeroing in on this. I mean, it's an absolute shocker. Firstly, and that's a massive problem for Starmer, because he's already come under pressure about making Matt Doyle, a lord in January of this year. And now it turns out Matt Doyle was a mate of Mandelson's and nodded Mandelson through to get the job in Washington. Another big problem for Starmer. Massive problem. The Foreign Office hasn't been truthful with the king. They've sent the king with 2 days' notice just before Christmas, when everybody's busy, getting the turkey ready or sending the gamekeeper out to shoot a deer. I don't know, whatever the king does for Christmas. Oh, we want to appoint Peter Mandelson as ambassador. He needs to be out in February. So here's his CV. Nothing at all about Epstein, knowing the king's, travails with his own brother and his relationship with Epstein. Nothing. We've not told the king that Mandelson is, an associate, or was an associate when he was alive, of Jeffrey Epstein. Massive failure. The Foreign Office essentially lied to Buckingham Palace. Second problem. Third problem. I just don't believe that there's been a proper security vetting process for Peter Mandelson. And in 1 month, which is practically unheard of, I just don't think it's happened. And if it did happen, I think everything we know about Mandelson suggests that he would have lied anyway. So there would have been a rushed process. Mandelson would have been given DV. He'd have lied, like a Boogie Street watch along the way to get it. And then he's been offered to get strap clearance to give him access to intelligence covering every country in the world, including China and Russia and everything else. Epic fail. And the fourth point is we've paid him 75,000 quid when we're absolutely under no contractual obligation to do so. You know, we paid him 5 weeks' notice. He stayed in the residence for another week after he was sacked because his dog, I don't know, needed to go to the vet or needed to have its, butt bleached. I don't know what you do with Peter Mandelson's dog. I don't know what sort of dog he has. But he needed something, so he had to stay in this massive Lutyens mansion for a week after he was sacked. and the Foreign Office then sidesteps the contract to say, well, actually, even though we're paying you 5 weeks' notice, we'll just give you another £75,000, and we'll tell the Treasury that we're contractually obliged to do so, which they weren't, because they'd met their contractual obligations already. So the whole thing is a complete crap show from start to finish. He shouldn't have been given the job. We shouldn't have lied to the king. He shouldn't have got security clearance. And we shouldn't have paid him £75,000. Absolute scandal. Keir Starmer. More people in Parliament should look at the details. The press has been woeful on this. The reporting has been bland. Yes, it's intentionally a dump of 147 pages to kind of dull you into boredom so that you're not prepared to read it. I've read it, at 4 o'clock this morning, drinking my coffee, taking the hit for you guys. This is a scandal. Starmer should be ashamed of himself. And, I associate myself with calls by other members of Parliament. I'm not a member of Parliament. Those figures, in public life who've called for Starmer to go. What a complete catastrophe this has been. So that was very detailed. I hope you find it interesting and illuminating in some way. Again, like and subscribe. I'm hoarse. I need some coffee and maybe get a different tie on. I don't know why I chose this tie, but I quite like it, but I'm not sure it goes with the shirt. But anyway, thanks so much for listening. Wherever you are in the world, I wish you very much peace. Please speak out against scandals like this. It's outrageous that Mandelson got this job and the government is being so shameless they're basically trying to whitewash what happened. And unfortunately, I think the news is only going to get worse because when volume 2 comes out, which will be even more incriminating, I'll be all over that and I'll be reporting back to you. So thanks again. And let's talk again soon. My name is Ian Pratt. I'm the Peacemonger. Have a good day wherever you are, whatever your nationality and religion. I wish you very much peace. Thank you.